The conference room felt smaller than usual that Tuesday morning. I sat across from my father, watching him shuffle papers with deliberate slowness. At 34, I'd spent 12 years building Harper Marketing Solutions from a small regional firm into a respected name across 3 states. My father, Richard Harper, cleared his throat. "Olivia, the board has concerns about your management style." I felt my stomach drop. Around the table, board members avoided my eyes. "We've decided it's time for a change in leadership," he continued, sliding termination papers across the mahogany surface. My hands trembled as I picked them up. This couldn't be happening. I'd landed our 3 biggest clients last year alone. "Effective immediately, you're being removed from your position." The words hit me like physical blows. My own father was firing me from the company I'd helped save. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood slowly, fighting back tears, and walked out with whatever dignity I could gather. Behind me, I heard my father resume the meeting as if nothing significant had happened. I drove home in a fog, barely seeing the road ahead. My apartment felt too quiet when I finally collapsed onto my couch. How had I missed the signs? I replayed the past months in my mind, searching for clues. My father had seemed distant lately, but I'd attributed it to stress. Now, I understood. He'd been planning this. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, but I couldn't face them yet. The humiliation burned too deep. I'd given everything to that company. Late nights, missed holidays, sacrificed relationships, all for a family business that had just thrown me away. By evening, anger began replacing shock. I poured myself a glass of wine and started making notes. My father thought I was finished, defeated. He was wrong. I'd built relationships with every major client we had. I knew the industry inside and out. More importantly, I knew his weaknesses. If Richard Harper wanted war, he'd just declared it on the wrong daughter. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tight. "Olivia, your father explained everything." I waited, hoping for support. "He's doing what's best for the company," she continued. My chest tightened. "Mom, I built that company. You know what I've accomplished?" She sighed. "Sometimes family businesses need fresh perspectives. Your brother is stepping into a larger role." Of course, my younger brother, Tyler, who'd coasted through college and spent more time golfing than working. "This is unbelievable," I said quietly. "You need to respect your father's decisions." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Even my own mother had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. My sister Emily texted later, brief and cold. "Dad knows best." The family I'd worked so hard for had abandoned me completely. That night, I barely slept. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, clarity emerged. I didn't need their approval anymore. I needed a plan. I spent the next week digging through my personal files, years of client notes, strategy documents, and market research, all legally mine since I'd kept detailed records outside company servers. One folder caught my attention, the Westbrook account. 6 months ago, I'd noticed accounting discrepancies in how my father handled their budget. He'd overcharged them by nearly 15%, burying it in vague line items. I'd flagged it to him privately, and he'd dismissed my concerns. "That's how business works," he'd said, but it wasn't ethical, and Westbrook didn't know. I had copies of everything. This wasn't just ammunition. It was evidence of mismanagement. I made more discoveries over the following days. The Chun account had similar issues. So did Morrison Industries. My father had been cutting corners and inflating costs for years, counting on client trust and ignorance. He'd built success on deception, and I'd been too loyal to see it clearly. Now I saw everything, and I knew exactly how to use it. I made my decision on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I would start my own marketing consultancy. Not someday now. I had enough savings for 6 months of expenses, maybe 8 if I was careful. More importantly, I had skills and connections my father couldn't take away. That evening, I drafted a business plan. Harper Creative Solutions had a nice ring to it, but using the family name felt wrong now. Instead, I chose Catalyst Marketing Group. Fresh, dynamic, and completely mine. By midnight, I'd outlined my initial strategy. Target mid-sized companies my father's firm had overlooked, build a reputation for transparency and innovation, and slowly work my way up to competing for his major clients. It would take time and patience, but I had both. I also had something he didn't: genuine relationships built on respect rather than family obligation. The next morning, I registered my business. Looking at the confirmation email, I felt my first real smile in 2 weeks. My father thought he'd ended my career. Instead, he'd just freed me to build something better. I started reaching out to contacts carefully. First was Janet Reeves from Summit Tech, a former client who'd always praised my work. We met for coffee, and I explained that I'd left Harper Marketing to start my own consultancy. Left? She asked knowingly. Were you pushed? I kept my tone professional. Let's say it was time for a change. She nodded slowly. I've noticed quality slipping on our recent campaigns. Your father's team seems distracted. This was valuable information. I'm building something different. I told her. Smaller, more focused, client-centered. By the end of our meeting, she promised to mention my new firm to her network. Over the next 2 weeks, I had similar conversations with 15 other industry contacts. I wasn't bad-mouthing my father. I didn't need to. I simply positioned myself as an independent alternative. Several people expressed interest in working together once I was fully established. My network was stronger than I'd realized. These relationships were mine, built through years of competence and reliability. My father's name had opened doors initially, but I'd earned respect through my own efforts. 6 weeks after being fired, I officially opened Catalyst Marketing Group. My office was a modest space in a shared business complex, nothing like the downtown high-rise I'd left behind. But it was mine. I hired 2 contractors initially: a graphic designer I'd worked with before and a copywriter who'd freelanced for several agencies. We couldn't afford full-time salaries yet, but they believed in the vision. My first real client was a small tech startup looking to establish their brand. The contract was tiny compared to what I'd handled before, but I treated it like $1 million account. We delivered a complete brand strategy in 3 weeks. They were thrilled, and their CEO posted a glowing review on LinkedIn. That single testimonial brought 2 more inquiries. By month 3, I had 5 active clients and was breaking even on expenses. Nothing spectacular, but it was sustainable growth. Each evening, I worked late developing proposals and refining strategies. The exhaustion was different from before, harder physically, but emotionally lighter. I wasn't building someone else's legacy anymore. Every late night, every successful pitch, every satisfied client belonged entirely to my own story now. My first significant win came unexpectedly. A regional healthcare company, Meridian Health Systems, requested proposals for a major rebranding campaign. I knew my father's firm would be competing, along with 2 other established agencies. I spent a week crafting my pitch, focusing on what made Catalyst different: personalized attention, transparent pricing, and innovative digital strategies. The presentation day arrived. I walked into their boardroom confident but nervous. My proposal emphasized measurable results and included a detailed timeline with specific deliverables. I'd done my research thoroughly, understanding their market position and challenges. 2 weeks later, they called. We placed second. My father's firm won. I felt disappointment, but something else too, respect. The marketing director told me my proposal was impressive and they'd struggled with the decision. Keep us in mind for future projects. She said, your approach stood out. I'd lost the contract, but gained credibility. In this industry, being competitive against established firms mattered. Word spread that Catalyst Marketing Group had nearly beaten Harper Marketing Solutions on a major pitch. My father had won the battle, but I'd proven I belonged in the war. A month later, opportunity knocked differently. A former colleague from my father's firm, Marcus Webb, reached out. We met at a neutral location. Things are changing there. He told me quietly, since you left, morale has dropped. Your brother is in over his head, and your father is micromanaging everything. I listened carefully as Marcus described internal chaos. Projects were running over budget, deadlines were being missed, and clients were asking questions. The Westbrook account is particularly unhappy, he said. My heart rate quickened. Westbrook, the account with billing discrepancies I discovered. What's happening with them? Marcus shrugged. They're reviewing all their invoices from the past year. Found some inconsistencies. This was it. The leverage I'd anticipated. But I needed to be strategic. I couldn't appear vindictive or unprofessional. If they're unhappy, I said carefully, they might be open to new proposals. Marcus smiled. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. He didn't know about the documentation I had, and I wouldn't tell him. But this confirmed my father's practices were catching up with him. I just needed patience and perfect timing. Life wasn't just business, though. My personal world had been damaged too. My best friend, Stephanie, had grown distant after the firing. She worked in the same industry and worried about being associated with family drama. We'd had coffee once since everything happened, and the conversation felt strained. Dating was impossible. I was working 80-hour weeks and emotionally drained. My apartment became just a place to sleep between long days at the office. Some mornings, I questioned everything. Was this revenge worth sacrificing my entire life? But then I'd land a new client or receive positive feedback, and determination would return. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Chun, who helped me process the betrayal. You're not just building a business, she observed during one session. You're rebuilding your identity separate from your family. She was right. For years, I defined myself through my role at Harper Marketing. Now, I was discovering who Olivia Harper could be independently. It was terrifying and liberating simultaneously. The loneliness was real, but so was the growing sense of authentic autonomy. 8 months after starting Catalyst, I got another shot at Meridian Health Systems. They were expanding into a new market and needed a targeted campaign. This time, 3 firms were competing, mine, my father's, and one other agency. I knew this pitch had to be perfect. I spent 2 weeks researching everything about their expansion plans, interviewing potential customers in the new market, and developing a comprehensive strategy. My presentation focused on data-driven insights and measurable ROI. I even created a mock-up of the first month's campaign materials. When presentation day arrived, I felt more confident than before. I walked them through each element, answering questions with specific examples and projections. The room's energy felt different, engaged, interested. 3 days later, the call came. We placed second again. My father's firm won by a narrow margin. I thanked them professionally, masking my frustration. But the marketing director added something unexpected. Your proposal was actually stronger. We went with Harper because of their existing relationship and resources. But that's changing. It was a consolation prize that felt almost worse than simple rejection. I'd been better and still lost. But failure breeds wisdom. I realized I needed different intelligence about my father's company. Through careful networking, I learned about growing dissatisfaction among his staff. 3 senior employees had quietly left in recent months. Projects were being delivered late. Client retention was slipping. I also discovered something interesting. Several clients had expressed frustration with being assigned to my brother Tyler instead of more experienced team members. Tyler meant well, but he lacked the expertise and dedication these accounts required. One client, Quantum Software, was particularly unhappy. Their account manager had recently left Harper Marketing, and Tyler had taken over personally. Within weeks, communication had deteriorated. I knew Quantum's CEO, Bradley Foster, from industry events. We'd always had good rapport. I didn't reach out directly. That would seem predatory. Instead, I made sure to be visible at the same networking events he attended. At a technology conference in September, we naturally ended up in conversation. He mentioned frustration with his current marketing team without my prompting. Sometimes change is necessary, I offered casually. He looked at me thoughtfully. I've heard good things about your new firm. Seats planted, I walked away. Patience remained my greatest weapon. In October, Catalyst Marketing Group landed its first major victory. A mid-sized manufacturing company, Pinnacle Industrial, approached me directly. They'd been impressed with my work on smaller accounts and wanted to discuss a comprehensive 6-month campaign. The contract was worth more than all my previous clients combined. I assembled my small team, brought in additional contractors, and we delivered a proposal that showcased everything we'd learned over the past year. We won the contract outright, no competition from my father's firm, because Pinnacle wanted specifically to work with me. The campaign launch was phenomenal. Within the first month, Pinnacle saw a 23% increase in qualified leads. Their CEO was thrilled and wrote a detailed testimonial. Suddenly, Catalyst Marketing Group wasn't just surviving, we were thriving. I hired 2 full-time employees and moved into a larger office space. The energy shifted. We weren't underdogs anymore. We were legitimate competitors. Industry publications started mentioning us in articles about innovative marketing firms. My father couldn't ignore us now, even if he'd wanted to. The war had entered a new phase. Then betrayal struck from an unexpected direction. One of my original contractors, the graphic designer I'd trusted from the beginning, accepted a position with my father's firm. I found out through a mutual contact before she even told me herself. When she finally called to explain, her excuses felt hollow. "It's a better opportunity," she said, "more stable." I understood the business logic, but it stung personally. She'd been with me since day one, knew all my strategies and client approaches. Had my father recruited her specifically to gain intelligence? The paranoia felt justified given everything that had happened. For several days, I questioned everything. Who else might betray me? Could I trust my remaining team? Was I being too naive about business relationships? Dr. Chen helped me process it. Not everyone will have your loyalty or your vision. She reminded me, that doesn't diminish what you're building. She was right, but the experience left me more guarded. I implemented stronger confidentiality agreements and became more careful about sharing strategic information. Trust, once broken by family, became even harder to extend professionally. I turned that setback into motivation. If my father thought recruiting my designer would cripple me, he'd miscalculated. I found a more talented designer within 2 weeks, someone with fresh ideas who elevated our work beyond what we'd been producing. I also started documenting everything more carefully. Every strategy, every client interaction, every innovation was recorded and protected. If anyone else tried to take my ideas to competitors, I'd have proof of origination. More importantly, I stopped reacting defensively. My father's moves no longer dictated my strategy. Instead, I focused on what made Catalyst unique: genuine client relationships, ethical practices, and innovative thinking. By November, we'd grown to 8 full-time employees. Our client roster included 12 active accounts, and our revenue was climbing steadily. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something substantial. The designer's betrayal had taught me an important lesson. I didn't need to match my father's tactics to beat him. I just needed to be better at what mattered. And increasingly, I was. December brought unexpected recognition. A regional business magazine published their annual list of rising entrepreneurs to watch, and I was featured prominently. The article highlighted Catalyst's rapid growth and innovative approach to marketing. It mentioned that I'd previously worked at Harper Marketing Solutions, identifying me as Richard Harper's daughter. The publicity was both thrilling and terrifying. Suddenly, our story was public. The article framed it positively: entrepreneurial daughter striking out on her own, but I knew how my father would interpret it. Sure enough, he called 2 days after publication. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Congratulations on your magazine feature," he said, his voice tight. "Thank you." Silence stretched between us. "You're making quite a name for yourself." I couldn't read his tone. Was it pride? Anger? Resentment? "I'm working hard," I replied carefully, "just like you taught me." More silence. Then he hung up without another word. That brief, strange conversation haunted me for days. What had he really wanted to say? Did some part of him regret firing me? I'd never know, because neither of us could bridge the gap that had grown between us. The magazine article triggered something unexpected. Bradley Foster from Quantum Software reached out directly. "I've been following your work," he said when we met for lunch, "and I'm not happy with our current marketing partner." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." He explained the situation frankly. Since Tyler had taken over their account, communication had been poor. Deliverables were mediocre, and they'd seen declining engagement across all campaigns. "We're considering a change," he said. "Would Catalyst be interested in presenting a proposal?" This was the moment I'd been working toward. A major client voluntarily leaving my father's firm for mine. "Absolutely," I said. "When would you like to meet?" We scheduled a presentation for early January. As I drove back to my office, I felt the magnitude of this opportunity. Quantum wasn't just any client. They were one of Harper Marketing's top 5 accounts. Winning them would send shockwaves through the industry. It would also be deeply personal. This wasn't me stealing clients through manipulation. This was a client actively seeking better service. My father had created this situation through poor management. I was simply offering an alternative. Then everything nearly collapsed. 3 days before the quantum presentation, my lead copywriter was in a car accident. She was physically okay, but unable to work. The presentation materials were only half finished, and I'd been counting on her expertise for the pitch. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. This was the biggest opportunity Catalyst had ever had, and circumstances beyond my control were threatening to destroy it. I could reschedule, but that would show weakness and indecision. Instead, I made a desperate decision. I spent the next 72 hours working almost nonstop. My team pulled together, heroically, everyone taking on extra responsibilities. We ordered food to the office, worked through nights, and supported each other through exhaustion and stress. By presentation morning, we had something solid, maybe not perfect, but strong enough to compete. I walked into Quantum's office running on caffeine and determination. My hands shook slightly as I set up our materials, but once the presentation began, adrenaline took over. I delivered every point with confidence, answered their questions thoroughly, and showcased our team's capabilities. When it ended, I had no idea if we'd succeeded or failed. I was too tired to read the room accurately. While waiting for Quantum's decision, I executed a different strategy. I'd held onto my documentation of my father's billing irregularities for over a year now, waiting for the right moment. That moment had arrived. I scheduled a meeting with an industry regulatory board, presenting my evidence of systematic overcharging and misrepresentation. I wasn't doing this vindicatively. I told myself it was about industry integrity. But honestly, I knew it would damage my father's reputation. The board thanked me for the information and said they'd investigate. I left feeling sick to my stomach. Had I crossed a line? Was I becoming the ruthless person my father had accused me of being? Dr. Chen challenged me during our next session. Are you taking appropriate action against unethical practices, or are you seeking revenge? I wrestled with that question. Maybe it was both. Maybe that was okay. My father had built success through deception and nepotism. Exposing that wasn't wrong, even if my motivations were partially personal. Sometimes justice and revenge aligned. I had to trust that I was doing the right thing, even if it felt complicated. The following week brought a critical moment. I received a call from Quantum's CEO, but he wanted to meet in person rather than deliver his decision by phone. I arrived at his office tense with anticipation. Bradley Foster welcomed me warmly, which I took as a positive sign. Your presentation was impressive, he began. Your team clearly understands our needs and has innovative ideas. I waited for the inevitable, however, we've worked with Harper Marketing for 6 years. That relationship has value despite recent challenges. My heart sank. Your father has offered significant concessions to keep our business, he continued. Reduced rates, dedicated senior staff, personal oversight. Of course, my father was fighting back, using resources I couldn't match. I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady. Business is business. But Bradley wasn't finished. Here's what we've decided. We're giving Harper Marketing 1 more quarter to improve. If they don't meet specific performance metrics by March, we're switching to Catalyst. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. It was an ultimatum to my father, not to me. I thanked him and left, processing this unexpected outcome. The competition had just intensified dramatically. My father's response to Quantum's ultimatum was swift and strategic. Within days, I heard he'd assigned his 3 best team members to the account, implemented weekly client meetings, and was personally reviewing every deliverable. He was fighting for this client with everything he had. What he didn't know was that I'd anticipated this exact scenario. For months, I'd been building relationships with other Harper Marketing clients, not poaching them, but simply staying visible and professional. I attended the same industry events, participated in online forums, and maintained friendly connections. When my father polled his best people to save Quantum, other accounts suffered from neglect. I started receiving inquiries from 3 different companies, all expressing varying degrees of dissatisfaction. One of them was Westbrook, the account I'd first discovered problems with over a year ago. Their CFO called me directly. We've had concerns about our invoicing, she said carefully. Given your background with Harper Marketing, would you be willing to review our account history? This was the opening I'd been waiting for. I'd be happy to provide a second opinion, I said. When I reviewed their files, the pattern was even worse than I'd originally thought. Systematic overcharging across 18 months, totaling nearly $40,000. I documented everything professionally and presented it to Westbrook's leadership. They were furious. February became a turning point. The regulatory board completed their investigation into Harper Marketing's billing practices. They issued a formal reprimand, and required my father to refund multiple clients for overcharges. The news spread quickly through industry networks. My father's reputation took a significant hit. Companies began questioning invoices and reviewing contracts more carefully. 3 clients left his firm immediately. 2 of them approached Catalyst directly. I accepted both accounts, focusing on transparent pricing and ethical practices. Our team was stretched thin, but we managed. Meanwhile, Quantum's evaluation period was approaching its end. I knew my father was delivering quality work there, fighting desperately to retain the account. But reputation mattered in this industry, and his had been damaged. I didn't gloat about his troubles. In interviews and conversations, I focused on Catalyst's strengths rather than Harper Marketing's weaknesses. This wasn't about destroying my father. It was about building something better. Still, watching his firm struggle after years of his arrogance felt undeniably satisfying. The daughter he dismissed was becoming a legitimate threat to his business empire. Everything was accelerating toward an inevitable confrontation. In mid-March, Bradley Foster called. "We've made our decision about the marketing partnership." I held my breath. "Quantum Software will be moving to Catalyst Marketing Group. Your proposal, your team's reputation, and your ethical track record were determining factors." I thanked him professionally, but inside, I was screaming with triumph. This was it, the major victory I'd been building toward for 18 months. We'd won Harper Marketing's flagship account. The news spread through the industry within hours. Business publications covered it as a significant shift in the local marketing landscape. I gave a careful interview, emphasizing Catalyst's client-centered approach without mentioning my family connection. But everyone knew the subtext. The daughter had taken down the father. My team celebrated that evening, and I allowed myself to feel the full weight of this achievement. I'd started with nothing but skills and determination. Now I was running a firm that had just beaten my father's company in direct competition. The vindication was overwhelming. Every doubt, every late night, every sacrifice had been worth it. I'd proven to myself, to the industry, and to my family that I was capable of extraordinary things. Not because of my last name, but despite it. The following weeks brought cascading success. Winning Quantum opened floodgates. For more companies approached us about switching from Harper Marketing. 2 others, previously loyal to different firms, expressed interest in working with Catalyst. By April, we doubled our client roster and tripled our revenue from 6 months prior. I hired aggressively, bringing our team to 15 full-time employees. We moved into a proper office space in a professional building downtown. Industry recognition followed. I was invited to speak at a marketing conference about ethical business practices and entrepreneurial success. The irony of becoming a voice for ethics after exposing my father's practices wasn't lost on me. Media coverage increased too. A business podcast interviewed me about starting Catalyst. I carefully navigated questions about my family, focusing on my journey rather than my father's failures. But the story was compelling. Everyone understood the underlying narrative. Meanwhile, Harper Marketing was struggling visibly. 3 more senior employees left. Client retention was becoming a serious problem. My brother Tyler was overwhelmed and making mistakes. My father was reportedly working 18-hour days trying to stabilize everything. Part of me felt guilty, but mostly I felt validated. This was the consequence of his arrogance and poor management. I hadn't destroyed his company. He'd done that himself by underestimating me and cutting ethical corners for years. 6 months after winning Quantum, I stood in my corner office overlooking the city. Catalyst Marketing Group now had 22 employees, 18 active clients, and projected annual revenue exceeding $3 million. We'd grown from a desperate startup to a respected firm in less than 2 years. My father's company still existed, but diminished. They'd lost 30% of their client base and significant industry standing. My brother had stepped back from leadership, and my father had been forced to bring in outside management consultants. We'd never reconciled. My mother occasionally sent brief, awkward text messages. My siblings remained distant. The family I'd known was effectively gone. Some nights that hurt deeply, but I'd built a new kind of family, my team, my clients, people who valued my competence and character. I'd also rebuilt myself. The woman who'd been fired in that boardroom felt like a different person now. I was stronger, more confident, more independent. Therapy had helped me process the betrayal without letting it define me. I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most give us the greatest gifts. In this case, the gift of necessity. Being fired had forced me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. Looking at my company's logo on the office wall, I smiled. My father had intended to end my career. Instead, he'd launched something far more powerful than either of us could have imagined. I'd won not through revenge, but through resilience, strategy, and refusing to accept his definition of my worth. This was my empire now, built on my own terms. And it was only the beginning.